interviewed Dr. Tharoor on this book, so this conversation will be more about what I've read and the feedback that I continue to get, including one which I just picked here, Dr. Tharoor. I was told that they are such tough words. Why does Dr. Tharoor love wordplay so much that he makes it difficult for most?
Oh, come on. The idea is to get fun out of words. I mean, look, the whole purpose of words is to communicate, to be understood. So using words no one understands is no fun, because after a while, if no one understands you, they won't listen to you. And certainly for someone in my line of work, I want to be listened to. Whether I'm a writer, I want to be read. If I'm a politician, I want to be heard. So either way, words are used to communicate. And to my mind, at the same time, you can't just see them as an instrument, like a nail you hammer into a wall. It's also got to be something which imparts some pleasure, some joy, because words we are living with all our lives, ever since we first learned to express ourselves. Words have to come into service, and so why not do it in an enjoyable way? And that's why the delight I've taken in words and word games and in puns and alliterations and in acronyms and backronyms and homonyms and antonyms and all of that. That's some of the fun I want to impart to others. You know, for everyone who gives you a feedback like that, Mari, there's somebody else saying, gosh, I didn't know this. What fun, I want to try and learn more. So I hope there will be some of that kind too.
So you are a provocateur.
Like
you like to provoke, and at the same time you realize that makes people learn so much. It's always a learning process, but you also say that words are magic. When did you learn, when you look back at your own journey in discovering this magic, when was that journey? When did it begin?
Childhood. And it has started because I was an asthmatic child, and very badly asthmatic at a time when, first of all, there were no bronchodilators and inhalers and nebulizers and so on. No one had invented them. So essentially you would be given a strong pill that made your heart thud fast and you couldn't sleep. And there I was, a little asthmatic, wheezing child with big round eyes, sitting up all night, unable to lie down because then I would choke to death, and unable to sleep and unable to go out and play with friends. So, and those were the days when there was no TV in India, and there certainly was no Nintendo or PlayStation or mobile phones or laptops. So what did I have? I had books. The only thing that kept me going was books. And so I read widely, indiscriminately, books I enjoyed, books I couldn't understand, my parents' books, because I had no elder brothers and sisters whose books I could borrow. I was the eldest, and books were my escape, books were my entertainment, and books were my education. So with that, I learned, and I barely needed to look up a dictionary, because when you come across the same word in 3 different books, 3 different contexts, 3 different stories, 3 different usages, you'll very quickly figure out the meaning and the usage of the word. And so I just read, and I read madly and wildly, and fortunately I didn't have very censorious parents telling me what I should and shouldn't read. And so I read a lot of stuff, as I said, including things I couldn't understand, because I just grabbed books off my parents' shelves when I was way too young to understand them, but I somehow managed to get into them, and they kept me going, they kept me distracted.
And you would have read how many books?
Oh, who keeps account? You know, honestly, when you love something that much, you don't really sit around. There was one year when I was foolish enough to set myself the goal of reading 365 books in a year. I think I was 12 or 13. It was just a silly thing to do. I did it. I hit the goal before
in a year.
I kept, sometimes when I was reading, I think one of the books I read that year was Gone with the Wind, which is like 1,000 pages long. So I immediately made up for it by reading a couple of very short books and counting them also as books. So I mean, this is definitely cheating. But at the same time, the worst thing about it is when you're reading to a deadline, you partially deprive yourself of the pleasure of reading. Because reading is also about savoring the words, savoring the context, if necessarily going back on something, that you want to see once again how something has been expressed. Or sometimes you read a book and the ending surprises you and you want to go back to earlier bits of the book to see whether that ending was prefigured, whether the author has done justice, whatever it may be. And all of those things, you don't have time to do because you're very anxious to put one more notch on your list so you can go on to the next one. That wasn't a great idea. So when I finished that year, and I did finish before Christmas. I decided never to do that again. And I've never ever held that up as an example of something to do. If I ever tell the story of doing it, I tell the story with a certain amount of chagrin. It really wasn't a smart thing to do. But I mean, I imagine that was the year I read the most. But I would imagine that throughout my childhood, well until the time I became a very busy adult, I must have read a couple of hundred books a year. Then, as one gets busier, one gets less and less time. Social obligations start coming in adult life, other demands, other obligations, work. My own writing also occupied the time that would otherwise have been available for reading. You suddenly start reading only on planes, or you start reading for a purpose, like when I'm writing something that requires a certain amount of research. The time devoted to writing is all focused on reading for that book that you're writing. So that's Nehru's biography. I read an awful lot of Nehru. 1 year I read nothing but Nehru, or Ambedkar similarly. Or when I did a book during COVID called The Battle of Belonging, which was about nationalism and patriotism. And I must have read about, 150. I can't say I read every word of every book, because when you're reading for a purpose, you know what you're looking for in the book, and you read those sections or those bits to do your research. So, I mean, that kind of thing. So I can't say that I'm having the kind of satisfying reading life that, say, my sister here, who is a very diligent reader, she manages to read everything she wants to read. She's also a writer, she writes children's books, but she makes it a point that when she hears about a book or reads about a book or comes across a review, she will make it a point to read it. Whereas I will very often be greedy enough to go and buy the book, and then it'll pile up in what the Japanese call yosundoku, this pile that gets unread sitting on the bedside table. And after a while, the bedside table then gets moved into a shelf, and then a new pile comes up and that gets moved in. So increasingly, I think at some point you reach a critical mass when you own more unread books than you actually read, and then you say, hey, this is not